Welcome back to the Dare to Dream podcast. My name is Gregory Russell Benedict, and this is a podcast about challenging you to embark on the adventure of your life. Today, we have a solo episode where we are going to take a walk through my mind, talk about some of the things that I've been thinking about, mulling over, grappling with, all the good stuff. And this journey starts from something I heard about 2 years ago to something I heard just the other day. And there's so much stuff in between. So I'm really excited for you to join me as we take a walk through my mind. Let's start with the big caveat. These are just my thoughts, my musings, the things I've been mulling over. There may be some truth in them for you. There may be no truth in them. Please take everything with a grain of salt. And if it feels like it fits in your life, use it. If it doesn't, throw it away. No need to take what I say as the truth because this is just what I am figuring out in my life these days. So I want to start with a really powerful story I heard the other day. And this story takes place during World War II. So the stage is World War II and the Blitz on London. London is getting bombed by Germany, and across London, there are these psychiatric wards, and they have been full of men for years and years who have been completely comatose. They are unresponsive, they're not talking, they can't move. They've literally been in hospital beds for 5, 10 years. It's crazy. So then Germany starts bombing London, and there's fires, there's injuries, there is a need for ambulance drivers and truck drivers. And I don't know if you can guess where this is going, but these men who had been in comas wake up from the coma and literally go start driving these fire trucks, these ambulances. They get out of bed, seemingly heal themselves from this psychotic illness they've been suffering from, and they go be a hero and save the day. The moral of the story here, and this story is from a podcast I listened to recently on modern wisdom by Chris Williamson. And he says, if you give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, he will crawl over broken glass with a smile. And this episode is going to be all about purpose for everyone, but especially for men, because there's a lot going on in the world today regarding men and their purpose and their lack of purpose. And so, another really interesting finding from this podcast, there's this big study done on female depression versus male depression. And typically, this is what the study said, with female depression, women want to feel loved and accepted. That's how they get out of depression. That is a lever that they can pull to get out of depression, where men, instead of feeling loved and accepted, especially if they're depressed, they would rather feel powerful and capable. They want to feel competent. They want to feel like they can achieve something outside of themselves. And that really helps them get out of depression. And so this goes back to, if you give a man a purpose, he will literally wake up from a coma and save the day, or at least try and save the day. That's what's worth noting here, is that so many people, especially men these days, are lost. They're floating through life without a purpose. They don't know what they're here to do. And it's really easy when you're in that category, that fog, to fall into things like Peter Pan syndrome, where you're playing video games as a grown man all day, every day. You're addicted to porn. You're doing all of these unhealthy behaviors that actually give you indicators of what we want. So let's talk about video games for a second. Video games give you an indicator that you are progressing, that you are living a story worth telling, that you are saving the day, because that's literally what you do in a video game. Porn, for example, can give the indication of love, of romance, of that aspect that is essential to human life, but you're not actually getting that, right? You're watching someone else get that. And I've just been really passionate about purpose, and especially purpose with young men recently, because I have seen it a lot in myself. I was drifting for a while, but also I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about this crisis, with this masculinity crisis, this crisis with young men who are lost. And that's why people like Chris Williamson, why people like Jordan Peterson, for example, have become so popular. On the topic of purpose, I want to go back about 2 years ago to this quote I heard. And this quote is by Alan Watts. And it started this enormous thought exercise that I have been wrestling with and languishing in for a while. And here's the quote: "The meaning of life is to just be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple, yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves." This quote inspired a lot in me because, on one hand, I believe that to be completely true. You look at a newborn baby just lying there doing nothing, and you unconditionally love that baby. It's not that that baby needs to achieve anything outside of itself to be loved. It is worthy of love just as it is. It doesn't need to take out the trash. It doesn't need to write an essay. It doesn't need to go on a run in order for you to love it. That baby is worthy. And yet, when I think about myself in particular and my purpose and what I feel I'm here to do, if I don't achieve anything outside of myself during my lifetime, I tend to feel that my life would lack purpose. I struggle when it comes to this unconditional love for myself if I never did anything, if I never impacted anyone, because I do think that we are all here to achieve something beyond ourselves, to have a greater impact than just our own little world, but to positively contribute to the lives of others, to show up in ways that in your existence, you make other people's lives better. And so this set me on a big spiral because I'm really big on self-love. And yet, if I'm not able to love myself unconditionally, if I were unable to achieve anything, that seems to be a bit of a contradiction there, right? And so it's something that I've been grappling with for a long time. I've been thinking about it. Is this okay? Is it okay to feel like I need to prove myself, to others, right? Because we often say that we don't want to care what other people think. And I have espoused that belief forever. And I've legitimately thought that I've gotten to the point where I don't care what other people think, but I'm starting to realize that that is wrong. I don't care what other people think when, for the most part, they think good thoughts about me. But if you were to tell me that tomorrow, maybe in response to this podcast, in response to something I put out, that everyone was going to hate me and I would lose the support of my friends, my family, my loved ones, I absolutely would care what people think. And I would go about changing that. But back to this idea of needing to achieve something outside of yourself. This is arguably my greatest motivator. This quest to prove to myself and others that I am capable, that I'm competent, that I can do hard things. I would say that this drives almost everything I do. And I want to explore this a little bit and then talk about why I actually think that's okay. I've come full circle to first questioning it, thinking that, oh, I need to work through this with my coach, to now thinking that maybe that's okay. And I'll tell you why. And also, maybe that's not okay and I do need to work through it, but we'll see. So, this drive to achieve something outside of myself, it's the reason why I want to live a story worth telling. I want to live a story worth telling for me, to live a life true to myself, not the life others expect of me. But in that story worth telling, there's these epic adventures that are unbelievably hard that give me a chance to build character and prove myself. I've always been obsessed and fascinated with this idea of pushing myself to the point of breaking so that I see what I'm made of in those hard moments. It's almost as if I want to crack myself open so I can see what's on the inside and figure out how to get more of that, if that makes sense. But it's this drive that in college led me to do these insane finance competitions that were 600-hour projects where my friends wouldn't see me for an entire quarter. People thought I died. But it was this immense meaning and fulfillment that I got from going through these unbelievably hard challenges. And right, it's just school, it's just a finance competition. Like I had food, I had shelter. It really wasn't that hard. But in that same search for challenge, it's why I've run 50 miles. It's why I've run for 2 days every 4 hours for 48 hours. It's why I quit my job in finance, threw myself into the unknown to try and figure out what I actually wanted to do. It's this quest to push myself, to improve, to constantly be moving closer to that highest and best version of myself. And here's the hot take. I think that it is okay to not love all of yourself. And let me explain what that means. And also let me give a big caveat. As I mentioned before, I am huge on self-love. And I would say that my self-love is unbelievably high if it's unbelievably high if I'm achieving things, if I'm checking the box, if I feel like I'm living a story worth telling. But if I'm not doing the things I said I wanted to do, if I'm breaking commitments to myself and others, my self-love plummets and it goes low. And I think that's okay. And here's why. I think it's okay to not love all of yourself, but you do need to integrate all of yourself. And this goes back to what Carl Jung talks about with the shadow self. So the shadow self is the parts of yourself that you dislike. It's the ones that bring you shame, embarrassment. You try and suppress your shadow self because it's the thing that you see in others that you despise in yourself. So let me give you an example. If I see someone who I deem to be competent and capable and has potential, they can do things, and yet I see them sitting on the couch, wasting away their life, or I guess it's me judging them to be wasting their life. That really grinds my gears. And after sitting with that for a long time, I realized that the reason that bothers me so much is because that is my shadow self. That is the part of myself that I am trying to eradicate and banish. That lazy, slovenly part of me that wants to just sit there and not do anything. That's the part of myself that I do not love at this moment. And on that note, I think it's okay to use that part and use the fear of becoming that part to motivate you. I have found no other fuel source that is more motivating than self questioning or self doubt. The journey to prove to yourself that you can do hard things is unbelievably powerful. And what's been coming up for me recently is I'm seeing how inspired I am by that in other people too. So there's this rapper called NF. His real name's Nathan, has a last name with an F. And he talks really, really, really openly about his lack of self-worth or his self-worth challenges over the years, where he feels like he's not good enough, not smart enough, not fast enough, not talented enough. And I find that unbelievably inspiring. And I've been trying to unpack and figure out why that is. And I think actually I know why that is. It's because I've struggled with those feelings too myself in all of my college years, especially working in finance, where there's always going to be someone who is more quantitatively gifted than you. I struggled with feeling like I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't good enough at finance. And honestly, now that we're talking about it, I've for sure struggled with overall feelings of inadequacy and not feeling good enough in other areas of life. And let me tell you, after working with dozens and dozens of coaching clients, both on my individual practice side and executives, I would say the human condition a lot of times is feeling like you aren't good enough. So we all struggle with these feelings. And I think the question is, what are you going to do with these feelings? Are you going to sit with them and wallow in self-pity? Or are you going to use them as a challenge to get out there and motivate you? I mean, a ridiculous example of this is that when I ran my first half marathon, I ended up winning my age group because I was so angry. I was so angry at two things. Well, multiple things. One, I didn't realize that we were going to be running in deep sand. They told us this 2 days before the race. I hadn't trained in sand. I had never ran in sand. It was terrible. I was also really angry because the friend who had convinced me to sign up for this race bailed at the last minute and she wasn't there. And the third reason I was angry is because I was trying to prove to myself that I could do this really hard thing, that I could win this race in my age group. And it wasn't like I set out to do that, but about halfway through the race, I was like, okay, no one's passed me. I'm running pretty fast. Let's see how much this can suck. Let's really push ourselves and see what happens. I remember it was like mile 11. I was literally almost blacking out because I hadn't trained and I was running so hard. And I remember just getting primal, just pounding my chest as I was running. And my friend had told me this saying that I just kept repeating over and over in my head. If you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly. If you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly. And part of that too was like, I wanted to live a story worth telling. How epic would it be if my first half marathon ever, no training, I go out and win my age group? Like that motivates me unbelievably. And maybe that's bad because it's, focusing on telling the story, focusing on what other people will think. But again, it comes back to this idea that it's okay to use the fuel source that you can find. And I really think that's the moral of the story here is that whatever fuel source you have, use it. Use it to get started. And once you've gotten started, once you've started building that momentum, you can switch over to a cleaner fuel source. And this is another podcast that was really foundational in my thinking. It was a conversation between Aubrey Marcus and Chris Williamson. And Aubrey Marcus is this guy who I really look up to. He is a very successful entrepreneur. He's incredibly articulate, has a very big podcast. He is a poet. He's athletic. He's kind of the ideal man that I've looked up to. And he talked about how everything he's done, from building his company to getting in really good shape to becoming skilled at writing, at poetry, at dancing, things like that, that all of that was driven from a sense of feeling like he wasn't good enough and that he needed to make himself good enough in order to find his future partner. And this podcast was wild because he had just gotten married and he talks about how his motivation to get up early, to write books, to work out had gone down significantly because he had finally achieved the thing that he was aiming at. And it didn't make sense for him to keep striving to better himself under that paradigm that everything he was doing was to become the type of man that could get the woman of his dreams. And so he talked about how that fuel source of kind of not feeling good enough was really effective. It was like he was burning coal, right? It was dirty energy, but it was firing his engine. And now he's trying to find out how to, switch over to a healthier fuel source, which would be like solar energy. But he was talking about how it's not easy. It's not easy, especially when you've been burning that coal engine for so long. And then I think the last thing I want to say here is kind of bringing it back to masculinity. And honestly, it doesn't even matter whether you're a man or a woman, but where we are in society today, it feels like the narrative is that there can't be any struggle or hardship, that we have to fully accept ourselves exactly as we are. There can't be anything wrong with us, anything worth improving. We are just perfect. And that makes a really shitty story. The best stories are the heroes who start out weak, incompetent, scared, and they go through either with a mentor by themselves, the trials and the tribulations. They put the time in, they get beat up, they make a fool of themselves, they fail over and over again, and they start to get rid of the parts of themselves that aren't serving them, like the fear, like the insecurity, like the weakness. I mean, think about any classic movie where the hero goes on the hero's journey, right? They usually start out kicking and screaming, ripped from the ordinary world as they're called to adventure, as they meet the mentor, as they go on the trials and tribulations, and then they face the dragon. And yet nowadays, it's this, you're perfect exactly as you are, nothing needs to change. And don't mishear me in that. There is a lot of benefit in accepting yourself for who you are. And there's the big and you can always get better. An example of this in modern society is contemporary cinema is Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel, by most people, is acclaimed to be one of the worst films of the Marvel series. And it's because the main hero, she's perfect. She's already fully formed. There's no struggle, there's no hardship. Everything is easy for her. She has like unlimited power. And there's none of this struggle and journey. There's no story. She's just already fully formed. And so I'm all over the place on this podcast, but if I had to sum it up, I would say a few things. I would say one, it's okay if you are feeling like you don't love all parts of yourself. If you have some insecurity, if you have some feelings of not being good enough, that's okay. At least I think that's okay. I think you can use those parts of yourself in a positive way to better yourself, to improve yourself. And it's really in that struggle and that journey that life exists. It's in that space where the story happens. That's one thing. The second thing is that At this point, and again, I might change my mind in a couple months, I believe in trying to achieve something outside of yourself. And I think maybe what Alan Watts was pointing to is that you don't want to you don't want your happiness and your worth to be contingent upon achieving something outside of yourself, but it is a worthy goal. And I think that's what a lot of these Zen masters have is they don't tell you to move into the forest and never try and do anything. They say, go for it, like be ambitious, try and change the world in the way you want to see it changed, but let go of the outcome. Be okay with whatever ends up happening. This is a big part of adult development theory. The final stage you can get to in adult development theory, you go from self-authoring. Well, first you start at the socialized mind, which is caring what everyone thinks about you. You're very insecure. Then you move to self-authoring, where you are the author of your own life. You're in control. And then the last step, the one that's only like 1% of people ever get to, is called the self-transforming mind. And this is like the example is you're like Waze, you're like Google Maps, that whatever happens to you in life, if the path you're on gets blocked with traffic, you just recalculate and you don't have any emotion. There's no baggage attached with that. You're just like, okay, that didn't work. Let me find a different way. So it's this complete lack of attachment to the outcome. And I think that's what these Zen masters are pointing at. They're not saying that it's bad to be achievement oriented and try and accomplish things, but they're saying it is bad to hold so tight to the way you think it needs to happen that you get upset and you get frustrated when it doesn't go your way. Oh, that was a lot. That was a lot. But honestly, I feel so much better accepting that it's okay that I'm motivated by these somewhat darker energies, that this shadow side of myself that I'm embarrassed of, that I'm trying to repress, the one that doesn't feel good enough, that needs to prove itself, that I can actually integrate that by using it as motivation, by acknowledging that he is there, that that scared little boy inside of me is there who felt like at some point in his life he wasn't enough, and to use that to my advantage to help other people live a story worth telling, to help them realize their potential, to in turn impact the people in their lives. That to me seems to be a worthy purpose, something outside of myself that is worth aiming at. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in with me today. I hope you enjoyed this walk through my mind. It was meandering and was not a straight line, but if I can help one person who hears this, who has struggled with those feelings of inadequacy, of not being enough, of wondering why they're so motivated by these seemingly dark things, man, that would make my day. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time, and I love you guys.